Okay, well, good afternoon. Thank you for your patience and welcome to this educational webinar. My name is Sue Danaher, and I'm President and CEO of the Digital Place-Based Ad Association. And the name of this webinar is rather snappy, Understanding the Digits of Digital Place-Based Research. Ooh, yeah. The DPAA is pleased to be co-sponsoring this event with Nielsen on location. So just a word about the DPAA before I hand this over to the lovely Teresa Spellman and Paul Lindstrom from Nielsen on location. The DPAA was founded in 2007 as a nonprofit organization and represents leading digital place-based networks, research companies, as well as the ad community that's actively engaged in planning, buying, and evaluating the effectiveness of this medium. On behalf of our members, we seek to foster ongoing collaboration between all the key stakeholders to provide standards and best practices to drive growth in this sector. In 2008, shortly after our inception, on the advice of our agency advisory board, we published DPAA's Audience Metric Guidelines, a body of work that has allowed the industry to organize itself around a form of currency. Nielsen is one of the leading providers in this area, and we're pleased to be co-sponsoring this educational webinar regarding the on-location report. So now, before we get started, just some rules of the road. First, attendees know that you'll be muted for the duration, and questions taken throughout the presentation will be given to the speaker. For Q&A, as questions occur to you, please use the chat feature on the top of your window and direct them to DPAA host. DPAA will be monitoring all your questions, and please know that we'll attempt to get to most of the questions by the time we're through. For anyone interested in recording of this webinar, we will follow up with a link to all attendees where you can download today's presentation. And then finally, we'd like to just emphasize the educational nature of this webinar. This is not a sales opportunity to those of you interested in selling, and I think you probably know what I mean. So with that, I am happy to hand over the podium to Ms. Teresa Spellman and Mr. Paul Lindstrom.
Thank you, Sue, and thank you to all of you who have joined us today. Sorry about the technical difficulties. I'm Teresa Spellman, Head of Sales and Marketing for Nielsen on Location, and I'm also joined here by Paul Lindstrom, who's from Nielsen as well. And at Nielsen on Location, our goal is to advance the global place-based industry by providing the only syndicated reporting in the market, as well as providing sessions like what we're doing here today. Over the past couple of months, Nielsen has been conducting education sessions to provide an overview of what we do and how it fits into the broader video landscape, and with the primary purpose to get feedback from agencies along the way. And those sessions have been led by our professional educator, who I will introduce shortly and will be leading today's session. Our goal today, though, is to bring that modified version of the session to make it more widely available for all of you on the phone. So it's with great pleasure that I introduce you to Richard Zakon, who will lead today's session. He is a professor of audience measurement at NYU and also not only actively involved with our group, but he is actively representing Nielsen's facilitator for the Center of Research Excellence. And we look forward to bringing more of these educations to you in the future. So, Richard, please take it away.
Thank you, Teresa. Thank you, Sue. I'm going to go back to the title because Sue said it was a snappy title, and we changed the title since it's snappy history. And it's an evolving medium, and instead of calling it digital place-based for the purpose of this presentation, we're referring to the medium as place-based video, because it's in the context of video that we're working, and it's in the context of video that we're going to be looking at the measurement. So let me lay out a little bit an outline for today. And I apologize for those of you who are experts at media math and media research, because you know a lot of what we're going to present here, but not everybody is. So we're going to do a review. It'll be pretty quick for those of you who are somewhat novices in the television research world. It'll be valuable. And Then we're going to talk about measurement and put the measurement of place-based video in the context of TV measurement and even out-of-home measurement. And then we'll look at the actual report which Nielsen does, the Nielsen on-location report, address some frequently asked questions about the report, give some examples of data, and then put it in the context of cross-media comparison. Then we'll have questions. If you have questions, again, you're encouraged to send them in, and someone will slip me a piece of paper, and I'll do my best to answer them. And I have help here. Paul Lindstrom's here from Nielsen, who's really expert in this particular area. So, we ready to go? Okay. Very good. So we're going to deal with some key distinctions of media math. The term media math is used. This is what I would call media math 101. And the first one is advertising impressions, gross impressions, the universe, little physics here, rating or a rating point. A lot of people are hard-pressed to define what a rating point is, although they've been working with them all their life. GRPs, there's a good one, and CPM, cost per thousand. So let's look. And the key measure in all of advertising is the advertising impression. Sometimes you hear the term exposure, pretty much the same thing. One exposure by one person, one time, is an advertising impression. This term certainly predates digital place-based. It predates television. It predates radio. It comes from the print world. You can have an impression of a print ad. Any advertisement at all would constitute one impression. It has impressed itself on the audience. Next term is a gross impression, which sounds a little disgusting, but it's not. A gross impression is simply the sum of all the advertising impressions on a schedule. Typically, you don't run just one ad. You run a series of ads, and you might run ads across different media. So you combine those impressions, and you get what are called gross impressions. Gross impressions are the sum of all the advertising impressions on a schedule. Now, these can be household impressions. Typically anymore, we talk about demographic impressions. So you need to define the demographic. It could be adults 18 plus. It could be women 25, 54, whatever the demographic is. One person exposed 3 times is 3 gross impressions. I should say gross impressions at the bottom, apologies. 3 people exposed 1 time each is 3 gross impressions. So the term gross goes to the point you don't know how many people were exposed how many times. It's the total number of exposures. Key measure of gross impressions. Next term comes from the language of physics, and it's a universe. It's the sum total of it all. It could be total population of households. It could be total population of persons. It could be total populations of a demographic, but it's the total population. Universe and population are pretty much interchangeable in the world of audience measurement. And the latest Nielsen number for TV households, and this number changes every year, is 114,200,000 TV households. Now, what's pretty interesting, just a little note about TV, that number used to go up every year. That number's not going up like it used to go up because people are watching television through means other than a direct signal over the air. But currently, Nielsen says there are 114,200,000 TV households. If Nielsen says that, that's how many households there are. The persons 2 plus, there's 280,400,000 persons 2 plus. So Nielsen measures people once they reach age 2. Now, some philosophies say that human life begins at conception. Some people say it begins at birth. Nielsen says it begins at age 2. So until you're 2, you don't make a difference to Nielsen, the agencies, the advertisers, or the media. After 2, you count. You're in the game. Okay, next term is a rating point, and that's a critical measure, a rating or a rating point. And a rating it's the size of the audience, and by the way, audience is really the same as impressions. It's the audience divided by the universe. We said universe is the same as population. So it's the audience size by the universe times 100. Why is it times 100? Because it's a percentage. It's a point, a rating point. So a rating is the percentage of the universe tuned to a particular channel at a particular time. It could be a household rating, it could be a demographic rating, men 18 to 49, whatever the metric is. By the way, this presentation will be available afterwards, and you'll have an exam, I think, scheduled for Friday at 12 o'clock. Okay, here's an example of how this works. Imagine there are 3 million women 18 to 49 viewers watching the program. and say, and this is close but not exact, makes the math easy, 60 million women 18 to 49 in the TV universe. There are actually about 64 million, but say 60. 3 million are watching out of 60 million. 3 divided by 60 times 100 is a 5 rating, 5%. 5% of all the women are watching that show. That's actually a pretty good rating anymore. Typically, ratings are expressed to 1 decimal point. Gross rating points follow what gross impressions are to impressions, gross rating points are to rating points. Again, you don't buy one ad in television, you buy a schedule. It could be a number of ads on a given channel. You can buy more than a single channel. You add up all the rating points together, and you get GRP, gross rating points. GRPs aren't something you can see or touch or feel. When I started media years ago, they would send me down to the 14th floor to get 20 GRPs, and everyone laughed at me, and then after a while you learn what a GRP is. But it's a conceptual term. It's a gross rating point, the sum of all the schedules. And planners plan on the basis of GRPs in television, and buyers buy those GRPs by buying particular programs and putting the schedule together. Hopefully you can't see the eyes of all the listeners, but I'm imagining the people out there, your eyes are wide open, and you're hanging on every word. So thanks. Next term, and this is a key measure in all of media and in television. It's the cost per thousand. It's kind of why we're here. If it weren't for the dollars, we wouldn't have come to work today, right? But the cost per thousand, and the M is the Latin word. Remember the M in Roman numerals, M whatever that means 1,000. So it's the cost per thousand. The cost per thousand what? Cost per thousand impressions, CPM. And it's defined as the cost divided by the audience impressions times 1,000. It could be the cost of a given ad. It could be the cost of a schedule. CPM, cost per thousand. It's a measure of cost efficiency. Now, lots of people get mixed up, which do you divide by which. I was at an agency over the summer and learned a new way to think of cost per thousand, and they told me think of it as bucks over schmucks, which is what they said, which is a delightful way to think of cost per thousand. But it's the cost per 1,000 audience members. And why is it 1,000? Because it would be a very small number if you looked at what's the cost per individual measure. So typically it's about cost per 1,000. Here's an example. Let's say it cost $100,000 to buy a 30-second announcement. And notice we need to define what the announcement was. It would cost more if it were a 60-second announcement. CPM would probably be double. It would cost less if it were a 15-second announcement. $100,000 for a 30-second announcement. Say there are 3 million women 18 to 49 viewers, that show that we were talking about. The CPM is 100,000 divided by 3 million times 1,000, and you get a CPM of $33.33. CPMs are around there. For those of you who are in the world of television, buying and selling television, those numbers are critical to you. You're aware of the CPMs. They vary by demo. They vary by time of day. They vary by time of year. What determines the CPM? Economics, supply and demand. A lot of buyers, CPM goes up. Not so many buyers, CPM goes down. You're all now media experts. By the way, any questions from coming so far? Everyone is perfectly clear about everything. Okay, great.
Just if you could speak up.
Speak up?
Yeah.
Okay, good. I will speak up. Okay, now we're going to go a little bit to Media Math 201, which is advanced media math. And here's a new term which didn't exist before a few years ago, C3 ratings. And then we'll look at a couple other terms, cumulative audience, research, and reach and frequency, sorry. Am I up speaking well enough now? Okay, good. I got a thumbs up. Okay, here's a term that emerged in negotiations in television about 2005, 2006, somewhere around there. C3, it's the new currency for TV. TV used to measure live viewing. People were watching, Nielsen measured it. We'll talk a second about how they do that. That's live viewing. But the advertisers and their agencies said, well, wait a second, we don't care if they're watching the program. We care if they watch our ad. That's what we want them to see. We want them to see the ad. And we know that people aren't as likely to be in the room when the ad's on as when the program's on. Now, there's truth to that. It's a little less than what people, the difference is a little less. But nonetheless, the advertiser said, we only want to pay for exposure to the ads. So the media company said, well, yeah, okay, we only want to pay for the ads. However, we now have these devices called DVRs, and I've heard it tell, I never do this, but some people actually fast forward during commercials on TV shows. So the media company said, yeah, and then they keep those program around. They may watch it 2 or 3 days later, whether they fast forward or not. So they reached a compromise in negotiations. This was not science. This was business. And they created something called the C3 rating. And the C3 rating is the commercial audience impressions viewed within 3 days of the telecast. By making it the commercial audience, the number went down a little bit. By making it 3 days, the number went up a little bit. So it was a compromise to serve the needs of buyer and seller. Now, some of the sellers would like to see C7 ratings. We might get to C30 ratings. But nonetheless, the current measure is C3 ratings, and it means commercial audience impressions viewed within 3 days of telecast. So now Nielsen, not only do they report live ratings, they report live plus 1 day, plus 2 days, plus 3 days, up to 7 days, and they also report C3 ratings. Stay tuned. That may change again in the future. Another term which is important is what's called a cumulative audience. And that's the audience which viewed some part of a program or a network. You can have a qualifier of different lengths, typically about 5 minutes. If you think of the way you watch TV programs, most people don't sit and watch a whole program and then go and watch another program. They graze. They flip from one to the other. They come in and out. Ever since we didn't have to stand up to change the channel, we've shifted the way that people watch TV. So a cumulative audience is you viewed some part of the program. And you need to be careful when you hear audience size to know whether it's an average minute, which is what a live or C3 rating is, or whether it's a cumulative audience. Sometimes this is called the cum or unduplicated audience. It's the viewed some part of the program, and usually the qualifier is about 5 minutes. Next term is reach, and reach is an important term. We're not going to discuss reach too much today, but we will, I'm getting an important note here. What's the question? The question says, how does Nielsen determine what part of audience is viewing commercials over 3 days? It's, you know what it is to count angels on the head of a pin? It's a little bit like that. They needed to define, and they do it on a minute basis. Nielsen defines down to the minute, and they distinguish whether the minute is a commercial minute or a non-commercial minute. And a commercial minute is any minute which includes any commercial. That commercial could also be promotion for the channel. So if the network is promoting itself, that would be a commercial minute. So all minutes are defined as either commercial or non-commercial. If they have any part of commercial of non-programming elements, it's called a commercial minute. So they separate out that group of minutes, and those are commercial minutes. And that's the basis for the C3 rating. I got it correct. Very good. Thank you. Okay. Any other questions? Ask your mom. Okay. So we're at reach. And reach speaks to, it's similar in a way to cumulative audience, but you might think of it as the cumulative exposure to an advertising campaign. If you have a campaign for an automobile, you have a lot of commercials together. You can know what your gross impressions are, but advertisers like to know how many different people did I reach. More reach, more sales. If you don't reach someone, it's very hard to sell them through advertising. So the reach is the total number of viewers exposed to at least one advertisement on a TV schedule. That's defined as reach. Very simple. How many people did you reach? It's typically expressed as a percentage of a household or demographic universe. You've reached 70% of women 18 to 49. Key measure. It's more of a measure of media planning than of media buying, but advertisers care about their reach. They always want to get more reach. How do you get more reach? You buy more networks, you buy more day parts, you invest more money. Notice salespeople, how I use the word invest. That's how you increase your reach. Frequency speaks to the number of times the average consumer sees the announcement. It doesn't say how many announcements you put out on the air. You could put 30 announcements out plus a number of channels, but no one's likely to see 30. What's the average number of exposures per person who was exposed at least once? So of that 70% who were reached, what's the average number of exposures? They could be exposed 1 time, 2 times, 3 times. It's usually yes or no. You're not half exposed even if you leave a commercial in the middle, which I hear some people do. Frequency is household or demographic, usually demographic anymore, and it's limited to those exposed at least once. And here's the magic here's the E equals MC squared of media. You get this, you could get a great job. And it's reach times frequency equal GRPs, right? It's a key formula for TV media planning. Let's say you've reached 60% of the audience. Say, using Nielsen databases, you average 3.5 frequency. 60 times 3.5 is 210. So 210 GRPs will yield a reach of 60 and a frequency of 3.5. You could buy that in different ways. You could buy a different number of networks still with 210. If you buy more networks, you'll get more reach, or you'll get less frequency. So one of the key decision trade-offs that media planners and TV make is, do I want more reach or more frequency? But the advertiser, your client, if you're working in an agency, says, what do you mean? I want more reach and more frequency. I don't want to choose. So you say, okay, Mr. Advertiser, or Miss Advertiser, then you can buy more GRPs. That way you'll get both more reach and more frequency. It'll cost you more money, and then the advertiser begins to make some trade-offs. Okay? That's Media Math 201. We've covered a lot here. Any questions coming in right now? We doing well? Okay, good. You're all snickering out there at this. I can't hear you, so I'll do my best. Okay. Now, that's the basic media math, and that's pretty important because a lot of these same concepts translate into place-based video. But let's look a little bit about the measurement in TV, for those who care. The basic measurement, national measurement of TV, and it has been now for 15 years or so, is what's called the people meter. And the people meter really consists of two separate devices that are installed in the homes of about 20,000 people around 20,000 households around the country. One device gets connected directly to the TV set. That's pretty easy to measure. And that measures tuning. That says, was the set on? Was the set off? And if the set's on, what channel is it tuned to? Pretty easy. The device has been around for a while. It made a fortune for Art Nielsen back in the 50s, or he developed it for radio. That's the tuning measure. That's the part of that, the set meter. What makes the people meter is you have a little device that looks a little like a cell phone. This was years before there were mobile phones, called the actual people meter, and that has little buttons on it, and each person in the household is assigned a button, and you press that button if you're in the room, able to hear or see the TV. That's the measure. You press your button. You may or may not be paying close attention, but if you're in the room, you're counted. If you're clearly not paying attention, you won't press your button. If you go into another room but can still hear the set, you'll still be counted. But you're asked to press the button when you enter and when you leave. Amazingly, people do this. Before they had the people meter, everyone said people will never do it. It was tested in Germany. Everyone said, well, in Germany, everyone does what they tell them to do. But it turns out Americans do it too. You tell them to do it, and Nielsen pays them oodles of dollars, like $1 a week, very little. But people actually appreciate the fact that what they watch matters. So people do, and there's lots of ways this has been validated. So this isn't like, yeah, right. Because it actually, maybe you can say, yeah, right, but lots of measures show that people accurately, more or less, push their buttons. We did a study, the Council for Research Excellence, about 3 years ago, where we had about 700 people actually observed by someone for a day, following them around in their house and in their work, and those numbers match pretty closely to the people meter. So that is the measure. It's considered really anymore the gold standard of TV measurement is a national people meter. 1 meter for the set, 1 meter for the people. It's combined. You might say they're integrated. You might say it's a hybrid measurement. We'll use that term shortly. But that's how national television is measured. Local people meter, which is approaching pretty much the top 50 markets, if not there yet, is measured in exactly the same way, but it's just in the local market level. In fact, those homes are used both in the national sample and the local sample, and some statistical weighting is applied to make sure it works. Now, the more traditional measure of TV, which is still used in many, many markets, is the TV diary. That's a little pamphlet where people with paper and pen actually write down what they watch. It is much maligned measurement, and there's reason to malign it, but it is cost efficient, which is reason to support it. Nielsen's doing a lot of work looking at alternatives. If this were wholly about TV, we would certainly speak about the TV diary, but it is still used, and it measures both the set on and off and whether the person's in the room. Not everyone fills it out so well is an issue. In some markets, there are set meters combined with TV diaries, another form of hybrid measurement. That approach is evolving, but that is a measurement. Set-top box is a new tool. Those are the little boxes the cable company put with your TV set, and that provides some data. It provides a very large number of households. It provides millions of households. It provides far more households, a much larger sample than the Nielsen meter. But more is not always better, is what we would say, and if we have some time, we'll get into this. It is more reliable because it's a big sample and the numbers don't bounce around as much. On the other hand, maybe no one's watching. And even if people are watching, we don't know what their demographics are just from the set-top box. So if you're interested in set-top box measurement, call your Nielsen rep. They'd love to talk to you about it. Or take the course I offer at NYU. We could talk about it there. Here's an old measure of TV. This used to be the gold standard. It's called the coincidental. They call you in the moment and say, is your set on? Who's in the room? What's the channel? It's called a coincidental because it happens immediately. That's a pretty good measure. Why don't we do it more? It's very, very expensive. People don't like to be called several times in the course of the evening, so it's tough to get cumulative audience and reach and other elements. But it is a good way to validate other metrics. And finally is a measure called recall. And recall is a problem. Recall, people don't remember what they watch, and everyone watches PBS, and no one watches the Kardashians for 6 hours a day, which the People Meter shows that they do. So recall, while it's used, is a questionable measure. That's a pretty good lecture there on TV measurement methods. And here's something to take from that, is the TV world has been moving to what's called hybrid measurement. And hybrid is a combination of two things. It's audio measurement combining different data techniques to increase both validity and reliability. This is Media Research 301. I'm going to teach you two terms. We'll do it in a minute. If you learn these two terms, you can sound smart at any meeting you go to if research is the topic. Because the question everyone asks is, are these numbers accurate? Right? You're right. That's true for TV. That's true for place-based video. That's true for any audience measurement. Validity goes to that question of accurate. Are we really measuring what we think we're measuring? When recall is used, we're measuring what people remember. We're not necessarily measuring what they watched. So there's it's not necessarily valid. When we measure TV through set-top box, we don't necessarily know what the demographics are, which is really what we care about. So validity says, are we measuring what we think we're measuring? Reliability is a different issue. Reliability says, if I took a different sample, would I get the same number? So reliability goes to how large is your sample. You can increase reliability by getting a bigger sample. Your numbers won't bounce around as much. And the only limitation there is cost. So there's a trade-off. But validity, you don't get by simply building a larger sample. Validity really requires greater care in your measurement. So hybrid measurement combines, typically, the reliability of a very large sample and the validity of carefully drawn questions and data collection techniques. So if you're in a meeting and they say, is this research accurate? You just stroke your chin and say, do you mean is it valid or do you mean it's reliable? And eyes will roll and the conversation will go on. Okay, now let's talk about another medium which I think is TV, and that's enough for today for TV. Another medium that to me makes the place-based video world so interesting because it's really at the connection world, the heart between TV and out of home. It really is TV that's watched out of home. But there's this whole other world of advertising out of home, which has the name out of home. It used to be called outdoor. And how do they measure out of home? Well, back in the 1950s, when I was planning media, we had out of home was measured by what was called daily effective circulation. Actually, I think I learned the term showings, which is showing my age. But they basically counted traffic. How many cars went by? What was the traffic count? And that was the measure. That measured traffic. How many cars were going by? That was the measure. And then pressure was put on, I don't want to say that, let's say the out-of-home world realized we needed a more accurate measurement, and so they created an adjustment to the traffic counts, and it was what was called a visibility adjustment, where they actually did measures to see, could the eye actually see the outdoor sign that was there? Was it on the right-hand side of the road, the left-hand side? Was it big? Was it not big? Was it lit up? Was it not lit up? So they applied some visibility adjustments to see if the eyes were on the sign, and they came up with what they called eyes-on impressions, EOI. What's their new measure? Eyes-on. By the way, gross impressions equal eyes-on divided by 2. There's a good research formula if you want one. Impressions equals eyeballs divided by 2. They changed the name of eyes-on just this year, and now they call it out-of-home ratings, the TAB, the Traffic Auto Bureau, out-of-home ratings. It's really the same measure. It's got a new name. People change their name. Out-of-home ratings, and it's still based on traffic counts versus a visibility adjustment. So the out-of-home community, similar to place-based, that it's not enough just to have the advertising out there. We want to make sure people actually saw it. Okay, here's a third measure, a third medium, which we won't talk too much today, but you should know about this because the digital world is responding to the same sense. It's not enough just to serve impressions or to serve ads. You need to make sure that they've been viewed or viewable. So the IAB, the Interactive Advertising Bureau, the 4A's, and the ANA have defined online video impressions. They have a new measure called Making Measurement Make Sense, 3MS. And they're shifting from served impressions to viewable impressions. This is a big movement in our industry. They're still defining terms, setting standards. The Media Rating Council, which is a watchdog on ratings, is involved with these discussions. The Council for Research Excellence gets involved. We're looking at viewable impressions and what constitutes viewability. But the goal is for digital media measurement to be comparable with other media. And what's the medium everyone wants to be compared to? Television. And why do they want to be compared to television? That's where most of the money is. So you have the out-of-home people wanting to be viewable, like TV. You have the online people wanting to do it, and similarly, the digital place-based world or place-based video looking to do it. So let's look at some comparisons here of the 3 different media. And each measurement takes some physical, turns from physics, space, and time. You can tell your parents you work in physics if they ask you what to do. And in space, in TV, it's in the room. You need to be in the room for television. Now that becomes a problem as we move to mobile and college students off. But basically, the traditional measurement for TV, for the people meter, is you're in the room. For out-of-home, you are in a vehicle which is passed by, or you're a pedestrian who's passed by. They actually have traffic counters. That's why they call it the Traffic Auto Bureau. They count. So the space there is you pass by out-of-home in a vehicle or on foot. Now, place-based has a term Nielsen uses called the zone of proximity, which I think is the program on the Sci-Fi Network this fall. And the zone of proximity means that you are in the physical space. You could be at the health club. You could be in a waiting room. You got today on an elevator I saw, place-based. You are in the physical space where it is possible to see or hear. You may have seen or heard. We don't know simply from being in the zone of proximity, but you are in the zone. So all 3 of these media look at spatial questions and need to count them. Then there's a temporal question of time. In TV, we look at minute by minute. The TV meter clicks, the people meter clicks, and Nielsen's measuring minute by minute. They don't report minute by minute, but they measure. Out-of-home doesn't have this same, to the best of my knowledge, doesn't have the same temporal issue. Car drives by, they either did or didn't. We don't know how many seconds they saw the ad. Place-based video, Nielsen uses a term, and I believe others do, dwell time. What a great word, dwell time. You dwelled in that zone for some period of time. You were at the health club, like me, for 5 minutes, like most people for 40 minutes. and how long you're there, how long you're in the elevator, how long you're at the gas station, the airport, whatever, is your dwell time. And Nielsen finds that out. They do measure. We will talk about how they do that. Then there's the next level beyond space and time. And space and time just says there was a body there for a certain amount of time such that they could have seen it. Now comes the critical question. Were they involved? The big buzzword for a number of years now has been engagement. In TV, the household's supposed to click their people meter button if they watched or listened. That's their measure of involvement. Were you watching or listening? Out of home has visibility. Doesn't mean they actually saw it, but it was visible. It was in their space of their eyeballs, could have picked it up. We don't know if they paid attention or not, but that's not what they're selling. They're selling what's visible. Place-based video, Nielsen asked the people the question, did you notice? Did you notice the screen? They either did or they didn't. What does it mean to notice? It's up to each individual respondent what it means. So you get a large sample, and there's a kind of common collective meaning of notice, which is comparable from one network to another. But all of them have some measure of involvement. Not quite attentiveness, but it approaches that. And then what's the actual measure? In the case of TV, you push a button. In the case of out-of-home, it's that traffic count plus the visibility adjustment. And for place-based video, it's the traffic count, we'll talk about that, plus the self-report. Everyone still out there? Anyone still out there? Hey, Joe, you're not listening. Pay attention. Okay, this is going to be quick. This is...
Can we pause for a question?
Sure.
Here's a question that just came in. Many traditional measures, including TV, are about verification with audience exposed. Will you talk about the move to accountability? Did the TV ad have an effect on the consumer?
That's an interesting question. In fact, that's a great setup question for the next slide, slide 24. So I have a plant out there. You did it well, and it's not just thank you. What this is, and this is like real advanced media research because it even has the ARF, the Advertising Research Foundation. And they have, this is called a hierarchical model. Traditionally, it was good enough just to know how many TV sets there were in the country. And as the number of TV sets grew, that was great. People knew the medium was growing, and so they were watching. But advertisers, in the end, really, what do they care about? They care about sales, which if you look here is a very high level. So the ARF, and this model's been modified over years, but they defined 8 levels of measurement. And the measurement where most of them, where TV traditionally had been vehicle exposure. People were exposed to the TV show. That's level 2. Not only did they have a TV set, but it was on, and they were exposed to it. C3 ratings was an effort by the agencies to upgrade that, to move that from vehicle exposure to advertising exposure. They wanted to measure exposure to the advertising. That's the C in C3. But again, that's only exposure. That produces an impression, but it doesn't mean in terms of accountability that anything happened. It doesn't mean that people were paying any attention. I'm told there are, I don't know how many people on this call, but not everyone's necessarily paying attention. That would be level 4. And not only are they paying attention, are they making sense out of what I'm saying? Am I communicating with them? Are you understanding? That's a higher level. Higher level from that is persuading. Do they actually see the ad and then say, oh, pretty good product? And then level 7 is advertising response. I intend to buy that product. Sometimes you read market research, intent to buy is a very important measure. That's a higher level yet. But ultimately what the advertiser really, really, really cares about is sales. So we try and move ever more accountability towards sales, where the industry, for the most part now, is in advertising exposure. Does that answer the question, Sue?
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Any questions on slide 25? Okay, let's see what slide 25 is. Okay, now we're going to go through how Nielsen goes about producing these actual measures of exposure for place-based video. And basically what they do, and in many ways it's analogous to what out-of-home does. First they do a traffic count. They need to know how many people were in an elevator, how many people were in a waiting room, how many people were at bars, how many people were at stadiums, how many at gas stations, blah, 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 all these numbers that they have to count. Relatively straightforward to do. It needs to be carefully done. That's, as part of the hybrid, that number goes to the reliability of their measures. The more people they have in there, the more reliable that's going to be. The more locations they have, the more reliable that's going to be. So they need an average daily traffic to the zone of proximity. They have a variety of methods, and they vary by network because of the way the network is distributed. That's traffic to the zone of proximity, and that's one base measure of traffic. Then they need to count the number of people who noticed. And how do you know if someone noticed? You ask them, did you notice? And the measure of notice is the percent of respondents who claim they noticed the screen. Notice doesn't say a particular ad, but they noticed the screen. That's the measure of notice. That's the measure, that's as far as we go in this particular medium, this particular technique, towards involvement. They noticed. The good news is, for all the networks, it's the same question, notice. Well, actually, that's not true. Sometimes they notice the screen, sometimes they notice the program, which says if you're analyzing a given place-based video network, it's a good question to ask the salespeople. Sorry, salespeople who are on the phone, but I'm encouraging your buyers to ask you questions. Gee, in your case, what's the measure? And they're all smart sales staffs. They'll let you know how that network gets measured. And it's all in the book, so you can find out. But the notice is the percent of respondents who claim they noticed the screen. Well, that's not enough because different networks operate in different ways, and so we need to know a couple other things. We need to know the dwell time. How long did the respondents stay in the room? What's the average daily dwell time in the zone of proximity by those who noticed the screen? How long were they there? If you're there 5 minutes or you're there 20 minutes, you're not quite the same individual for the advertiser. Huh? Ooh, another question. Let's pause for the question. And so neatly written, too. Does Nielsen measure the traffic, or does Nielsen accept the statement of traffic from the place owner? Accept the statement of traffic? Well, they do measure the traffic. And basically, no. They don't simply take someone's word for the traffic. They will take electronic verification. Let's say you're distributed through at a gas station. They'll have counts of how many transactions went by. So they'll use those verified counts. Am I getting a nod from Paul Lindstrom over there? I believe that's true. Paul, do you want to address that specifically?
In terms of it, we will collect data directly from the place owner. That can be done in a variety of forms. In some cases, it's electronic, but it is still going to be the best form that we can do in terms of collecting it, but we don't have an individual audit function on a location-by-location basis. I don't know if that answered it. Hopefully it did, but we feel quite comfortable overall with the transactional data that we end up receiving.
So that's the question of how they measure traffic. And again, traffic is measured differently for different types of place-based video. In the case of an airport, they're getting more questions in. That's good. In the case of airport, I think the Transportation Authority provides traffics in airports. Stadiums have counts. So we look for independent, objective, third-party measures of traffic. There's another question. So Nielsen does not measure traffic. Paul, so Nielsen does not measure traffic?
Nielsen measures transactions, which is going to correlate with traffic, which we use as an input into a modeling technique for us to estimate the traffic coming off from it. So it is a transactional database that is highly correlated with traffic that's used to model the estimate.
Otto von Bismarck once famously said about legislation, what was that? Legislation like sausage you should never see being made. I once heard a previous president of Nielsen say he added media research to that. Sometimes these measures are a little messy. What matters is that the research provider authentically say what they did. That's why the Media Rating Council is there. So you don't always get agreement on exactly how to do it. It's not always as clean as we might like, but what matters is the techniques are reported, and then the buyer can look at that. The buyer of the research can say, okay, maybe a little off here, probably good for this purpose, not for this purpose. And again, all these numbers are estimates because of reliability. How do you distinguish out-of-home from digital place-based? Well, I'm going to take a stab, and I'm going to let Sue take that one because she heads up the DPAA. I would say not all out-of-home is digital. That would be the first thing I would say. It's not all sight, sound, motion. That's my sense of the difference. Sue?
Yeah, we focus kind of basically two concepts that are inextricably tied. The first is that digital play space is traditionally, that's funny, for a nascent industry, but digital play space is characterized by content being delivered as well as by dwell time enough for the consumer to consume that content that's being delivered. So content and dwell time are the key differentiators versus digital out of home. Generally speaking, when you hear digital out of home, that can refer to static images that are digitally delivered, not necessarily any dwell time and not necessarily any content. So digital play space is content and dwell time.
I think you didn't violate the no-selling rule, Sue. Congratulations. And again, if more questions, put them in. We're reading them out and getting answers from people who know. So the dwell time matters. How long would go back to how they get their average minute exposure, which is the key metric in that report, at least I believe to be a key metric, and how long they dwell. And then the second measure there is the operating time. How long does this particular network operate in the course of the day? Some networks could be 6 hours, 12 hours, 24 hours, whatever. So you need to know how long the individual is there and how long did the network operate. The percentage of time that, on average, the individual is there divided by the operating time is, in essence, a rating. That of all the operation of the 18 hours that this network was operating, the average person there was there 2 hours. 2 over 18 is 1/9, so the rating would be 11%. They saw 11% of the ads that were put out on that particular network. Ooh, another question. Is play space measured by registered transactions located in the store? Paul, is play space measured by registered transactions? Well, again, not everything is in a store, but where there are stores,
we've got a number of people that are using registered transactions as a way of being able to estimate traffic, and part of that process involves measuring party sizes associated with those transactions as well as non-buyers. So there's more to it than strictly registered transactions, but that is one of the sources that we use for estimating the traffic.
So by party size, if I go with my friend to buy a computer, you know that, and that'll count as 2 people being exposed to the ads.
One transaction, 2 people.
Okay. And again, the thing to remember here is different. This is not like television. That's another difference between digital play space and television. Television is more uniform in how it's consumed. Digital play space or digital video, we're calling it, not digital video, play space video, there's more varieties of ways of consumption.
We have one more question.
One more question.
That I will read out loud.
This question is going to be read out loud.
So average minute exposure measures the minutes of exposure to the advertisement versus opportunities to see, or dwell time metric, measures frequency of exposures to the advertisement.
Average minute exposure says, on average, for every minute that this network is on air or on video, how many people were there, how many exposures occurred. So repeat the question again.
So average minute exposures measure the minutes of exposure to the advertisement versus opportunities to see, or dwell time metric measures frequency of exposures to the advertisement.
Okay, neither ends of that either or. It's great. You don't have to offend anyone in person if it's on the phone. So I don't know who asked the question, but neither either or pieces of that question is quite accurate. The average minute exposure is the number of exposures on average per minute of the operation for this network. The dwell time says how many minutes on average were the consumers being exposed. From the dwell time measurement, if you know how long the operation is and you know the load of advertising on a network, you can estimate that. But the question doesn't lend itself to an easy answer. But it's a brilliant question all the same, and you look great today. Okay. Okay, where are we here? Okay. So, so then the average minute exposure, we'll go through a calculation where you'll see all this on the next slide. Oh, here's a question. Can you take us through a calculation? Sure, that's the next slide. Average minute exposure is defined as the rating times the traffic times the percent of people who noticed, divided by 100 because it's a rating. Here's an example. Let's say Nielsen carefully measures, through one of its careful measurement techniques, 200,000 was the traffic count on an average day for this particular network. In sampling a subsample of the respondents, 75% of those respondents claimed to have noticed, remember the respondent claimed, that's the measure, claimed to have noticed the ad. The average dwell time, Nielsen observed, and actually the dwell time is not observed, Paul, am I correct? That comes from a query.
That's self-reported.
That's self-reported, the amount of dwell time. And let's say the network is operating for 12 hours at 720 minutes. So the rating would be an average of 20 minutes over 720 times 100 equals a 2.78 or 2.8 rating. Roughly, an individual would have seen 3% of the amount of exposures that that network put out. Then the average minute exposures would be that 2.8 rating, and then it's reduced by, we take only 75% of that because not everyone noticed it. That's how long they were there, but it's important, particularly if you're an agency, that they noticed your ad. So the average minute is the rating times the notice divided by 100. Oh, you know what's missing in there? I'm sorry, the rating times the traffic count times the notice divided by 100. So in this case, Nielsen would produce an estimate saying 4,170 consumers or a particular demographic, whatever demo we're talking about, on average were exposed to the ad or noticed the ad. Notice the screen. Uh-oh. They might not get that measure is hybrid traffic. Oh, you know, some of you might not get that this measure is hybrid traffic and custom. So the hybrid element here is the traffic is a third-party independent measure, just the movement, the people going through. The custom piece of it, and I don't know if I've fairly distinguished that, is the subsample that Nielsen uses where they actually ask respondents, did you notice the screen? That's where the notice number comes from, and that's where the dwell time number comes from. So the hybrid here is there's a traffic component and a custom component of notice. In a way analogous to what the Traffic Ad Bureau does with the traffic and the viewability adjustment. So here, in a way, is an adjustment for viewability. And in a way, it's what TV does by having a set meter and a people meter. So all of these different measures are all designed to produce as much accuracy as possible. And in the end, it's still sausage, but we do the best we can with it. I would not be serving you not to say that. Okay? Let's go on to the next slide. And here's the special, magical, very colorful report that Nielsen puts out, the Nielsen On Location report. It's issued quarterly. These data are from April, June. And it, here's the big thing about this report. First, a lot of people get it at their agency aren't even aware of it. Be aware of it. Go through it. If we did a seminar at your agency, we would physically go through the report. What it does, it lays, it's not bad here, although you can't read the numbers here, but we'll show some numbers. It lays side-by-side networks, so you can actually make real comparisons. If you're like most buyers, you have different salespeople giving you different types of information that, frankly, make their network look good. And I'm sure all their networks look great, but what the buyer wants to be able to do is draw comparisons one network to another. That's what this report enables you to do. It enables you to do it with a third-party measurer, namely Nielsen. It enables you to do it with different demographics. And if you've not seen this report, contact Nielsen and ask to see it. If you see it at your agency and not study it, spend a little time. Take an hour off from your job. Your boss will understand. Come through it. If you have questions, direct them to Nielsen. Ask for Paul Lindstrom. He's there. He'll answer your questions. Here's what's in the report, just so you know. There's a results of venue, and venue is the location where this happens. There's a good description, better than you'll get in a little seminar like this, of the methodology. The actual results here, we're going to look at some of those results, limitations, and again, this is all based on sampling data, accurate to a degree, permissible uses. These data are copyright, so you just can't copy them and distribute them freely. But take a look. Okay, let's look at the actual report. How are we doing? We're doing okay on time. Got a nod from Sue. Sue nods, I'm happy. Sue and Nielsen nods at the same time, I'm amazed. Okay. So again, let's look at some numbers here so you can see what's in the report. This is the average minute exposure, that number that we just built to by taking you through the calculation. And you'll notice there's different networks here. Here's the Best Buy network, retail, Captivate in elevators, CNN Airport in airport locations. They have lots of demos. We show a few here. And they give the average minute exposures. The way to read this is simple enough. Total 18 to 49 is total adults. There are, on average, for each minute that Best Buy is putting out advertising, 13,720 adults, 7,788 men, 5,912 women. There are different demos. We just took a few to highlight. The 18 to 49-year-old audience is 75% of all adult audiences. We're going to see in a second how young the audience is for place-based media. Male, 43%, 32% for female. That's interesting. Best Buy has more of a male audience, at least in this April-June report. Captivate, more of a female audience. CNN Airport, more of a male audience. Different networks appeal to different audiences. That's why you buyers are paid the big bucks to know. Here's a question. Could average gaze time, direct look, I like that, gaze time. Could average gaze time be used instead of dwell time? I would say, I imagine it could be, but it's really tough to know when someone is gazing. But you would need a lot of people there with clipboards and biometric devices to know when people are gazing. So instead we ask whether they're dwelling. Now, if a network is challenged a lot with its numbers, they might do a special study and do that. But again, the advantage of the on-location report, it's syndicated, it's a lot of networks there. So I imagine gaze time, I've never heard the term, I love the term, gaze time, but it would be very tough to measure. Okay, let's look at, now here's another,
Actually, if I could.
Please do, Paul.
In all fairness, there are technologies that will measure eyeballs pointed at the screen so that it is something that can be done with a technological solution. On the other hand, there are very, very big differences. Even if you were sitting in your living room, most people aren't constantly looking at a screen with their eyeballs peeled to it, so it becomes a very difficult measure for audiences.
But it's technically feasible.
It's technically feasible.
I imagine it's pretty expensive.
It could absolutely, as a hardware solution, be expensive, but it's also the question of how do you use that gaze time, and I think gaze time is a difficult metric to use.
Might be the sort of thing the DPAA gaze time. Again, there is, each network's different, and they're all distributed differently, so it becomes very tough to come up with a standard. But it's a good question. Not to offend anyone, it's my favorite question so far.
There are a few more questions that I'm going to read because it saves time writing. Question, when using the network data, we have impressions, but out of what universe? How do we get to the comparable GRP?
Good question. The report doesn't give, best of my knowledge, GRPs. It gives impressions. So it depends on the on the universe that you're interested in. If you're interested in a total U.S. universe, if it's a nationally distributed network, you can use it. The universe is the universe. It doesn't matter. It would be a little more because not every household has a TV set, so you could use total U.S. population instead of U.S. TV households for your universe. They're pretty close. But basically, you would use census-level data to determine the universe. You would take the number of impressions that your buy delivers on a particular network or combination network, divide that audience impression number by the universe number times 100, and you would get a rating. And add them up, and you would get GRPs.
Next question.
Next question.
Going back to ratings, would you say that's comparable to a TV rating? Let's say if we want to say the program performed at a 2.1 rating and this digital place-based medium performed at an X rating. Can you make that comparison?
I think X rating has a different meaning altogether. The idea is we are looking to achieve comparability. So the rating that's given when we do the percentage basis there that we use in that calculation is not quite the same as a TV rating because it's not defined against the universe. Even Paul Enstrom's agreeing with me. It doesn't happen all the time. So I say I'm right on that. But if you did take your gross impressions and you divided it by a measure of population times 100, you would get a GRP number which is comparable to TV. Again, the measures are slightly different, but then again, radio is measured different from TV, and you have GRPs for both. So, yes.
Is the Nielsen on-location report available at a DMA level?
Not today, but that's something that we are working on for the future. There are some networks whose individual monthly reports that we do for them do include some measure of DMA. So right now it's a network-by-network level, but we're looking to launch that in 2013.
Okay. Other questions? Okay, good. Okay. Next measure that's available there is something called gross minute exposures, and it's like gross impressions. It is across the whole range of announcements that a particular network puts out. So it's a measure of not the average minute, but just how much, I'll use the word, I'm sorry networks if you don't like this word, tonnage. How much tonnage of exposure is out there. Gross impressions are a measure like of tonnage. And here's an example. You see this example compares the tonnage of Captivate, CNN Airport, and Best Buy. And a lot of what drives this number is just how many spots there are. If one network has 10 spots an hour and another network has 30 spots an hour, and they're comparable in all other ways, the one with 30 spots an hour is more tonnage. But that doesn't mean that any given spot is viewed anymore. When Paul Lindstrom is silent, things are good. So, that's gross minute exposure, also given in the report, and again by demographic. And then there's another measure of exposures per visit. And again, this is largely, and all these numbers are in the report. I'm just highlighting some numbers here so you can see. Much of it goes, and it has to be at least one exposure per visit, because that's, if there weren't one, it wouldn't constitute a visit. In CNN Airport, that number is higher. That could indicate the dwell time is longer, very likely. It could, no, it's exposures per visit. It could mean the commercial load is higher. Is that right, Paul?
Yeah, it's a reflection of the relationship between the dwell time and the loop length. So that if there was a 45-minute dwell time for CNN and a 30-minute loop length, you would have 1.5 exposures during that typical visit.
Here's a lesson to be derived from today's webinar. Don't go anywhere without an expert. It's always very important. So thanks, Paul, for knowing the answer. Okay, now if you can't have Paul Lindstrom in your pocket, because Paul's a pretty big guy, Nielsen has developed a frequently asked questions, FAQs, on this topic. Things like what's meant by integrated approach or hybrid, every blah, blah, all the questions you ask probably are, they frequently asked, that's why they're in there. And you can get that, send an email, make a note on .location@nielsen.com and say, hey, where's my FAQ? It's spelled H-E-Y, exclamation point. Where's my FAQ? They'll send you a copy of that. That's available. And that answers most of your questions. It doesn't answer all the questions, but it answers a lot. Check that out. Let's look at some data. And I think we're doing well with time. So we doing well with time? I think we're doing well. Okay, good. How do you figure out cost per thousand? Oh, here's a question. How can I figure out cost per thousand? Well, we just happen to have an answer for you. Cost per thousand, we said cost per thousand, what we say is a bucks over schmucks. Like cost per thousand, dollars per audience. And let's say the XYZ airport network. We won't say what XYZ is. And let's say an announcement costs $300. These are not actual market rates. We just made up a number. So if you represent an airport network, that's not your market rate. I'm sure the demand is higher for yours. And let's say Nielsen does report its estimate, and it's an unbiased estimate. Its estimate for men 18 to 49 is $14,768 per average minute. Well, if you're paying $300 and you're getting 14,768 men, 18 to 49, multiply by 1,000 because it's cost per 1,000, and it comes out to $20.31. And that number then would be comparable with a TV CPM for a particular demo. That's why we do that. That's the effort here for measurement. That's why they call it currency. So that's an example of how to do cost per thousand.
We have a question.
A question.
Which cost efficiency model is more effective, cost per thousand or cost per point, and why?
Oh, that is a good question. I'm going to get a lifeline. No, actually, I can answer that question. Cost per point, they're comparable in that if you have two networks and the cost per thousand on one is twice the other, the cost per point on one is twice the other. Cost per thousand is measuring individual people. Cost per thousand exposures. Cost per point is the cost per rating point. The cost per point factors in the size of the universe. So the cost per point is a measure usually used for media planning. The cost per thousand is a measure usually used for media buying. And they vary based, if you look at the formulas, if I had a blackboard here, I could take you through it. It has to do with the size of the universe. But they're comparable. One goes up, the other goes up.
And usually cost per point is used in a place where the universe is common among the points that you're comparing, I think.
It would need to be. It's always against a particular universe. Cost per points are based on a demographic. Well, cost per thousand are too, I take that back. But what distinguishes the cost per point from the cost per thousand is you're factoring in the size of the universe.
Right.
Another question there?
No, we're good.
Okay, next question. How do I compute gross rating points? Oh, good. Gross rating points. Interesting, Nielsen doesn't have the letter W to describe women in this report. They have the letter F to describe females. Why that is, I have no clue.
18 to 21.
18. Is that the 18 to 49? So to get gross rating points, we talked about how you might get that. It's let's say we look in the report and we see that Best Buy has on average 5,912 women, 18 to 49, on average exposed per announcement. And let's say you buy a schedule of 100 announcements. Again, you don't buy just one announcement. So how many impressions do you get? It would be 100 times the 5,912, or 591,200 exposures. That's the number of gross impressions for females 18 to 49. To get gross rating points, you would take the impressions divided by the population, or the universe, times 100. You do the math, and you come out with 0.99 female 18 to 49 GRPs. Now, how can we be so accurate to say 0.99? Probably would be smart to say that's one rating point or one GRP. So you don't want to be overly precise. But that's how you would get GRPs. You simply take the impressions. Okay. Should I answer it?
Sure.
Okay. What's the industry standard for CPM rate in digital place-based media? I would ask my rep and then divide that by 10. I don't know. I don't know what to say. I'm not in the marketplace. You would need to be in the marketplace and know. And again, different demos, there's going to be different rates. The cost per thousand depends on what the demo is. So there's not a single cost per thousand metric. It varies. And again, what determines CPM? Laws of economics, supply and demand. If the marketplace is strong, CPMs are going to rise. Probably a good time to buy now because there are a lot of competing networks. This probably puts the buyer in an advantageous position. But the truth is, I don't know because I'm not in the market. Okay, audience composition. That's a question often comes up. How's the audience composed? What does it look like? Well, let's go back to the female. We want to know what's the female 18 to 49 as a percent of all adults. You get the average minute exposure and divide it by the average minute exposure for all adults. Pretty straight arithmetic. You did it in the 6th grade. And you divide the 7,481 by 15,210, which is all adults. What that says is 49% of all the adults exposed are women 18 to 49. Now you can index that if you know that in the population, women represent 28% of the population, you can compare that and come up with an index. That's pretty fancy, an index of 175, which says that women are 75% more likely to be exposed to this particular network than their population would suggest. Okay, last bit here, and this is some nice data that Nielsen's put together so we can have some context for what place-based provides, place-based video provides. Let's look at first the gender, place-based video, and again, this is based on 14 measured networks. This is not based on the whole medium, but the largest 14 networks are pretty much going to be reflective of the medium. And what you see here is place-based video with a little more male than television. Television is traditionally older and female. Place-based video is more male than television, 52% versus 47%. If you're looking for men, you should give a second thought to place-based. And again, it varies network by network. This is pretty interesting. If I were Sue Danaher, I'd be smiling at this. And it's the age of the audience for place-based video. 72% of the audience for place-based video, we see these 14 largest networks, are 18 to 49. Where in TV, only 41%. So if you're looking for younger people, place-based is going to skew towards that. And again, it depends on the network. Right? If you, I would imagine in doctors' waiting rooms, the ages might be a little older than they would be at bars or stadiums or other places. So you've got to look at what your audience is. But overall, the medium is a young audience. Why do you think that is? Correct. Young people are out of the house. Right? Me, on the other hand, I haven't left the house in years. I'll be here today. So it's a youthful audience. It's a male audience. Compared to streaming video, you hear a lot about streaming video. It's actually younger than the audience for streaming video. Even geezers can get streaming video. Not the sellers of streaming video, but it's a very youthful audience and ought not to be forgotten. There's a slide we were going to take out. No? Oh, that's why it's staying in. Okay, good. And what that is that's comparing just overall usage of place-based video compared to mobile. And oh, I'm on the wrong machine. Okay, well, it's all right. Ask Nielsen about this. He'll be happy to tell you. But it's a comparison, and I think we never did determine whether that was monthly or weekly. Is that correct? Do we know the answer?
Yeah.
That's how it goes. You're looking into my imagination. Okay, and this is pretty interesting. This now looks at different categories of sites, not individual sites, but categories. And it's the gender, and it's why an advantage of the medium is you can select a lot based on the type of network that it is. And notice the male networks are hotels, health clubs, gas stations. I guess men pump the gas in the family. They have a Prius. And then retail is more women. Office is more women. You guys aren't getting the job done. Stadium's more male. Airport's more male. So you can select gender depending on the network. Age depending on the network. Who are the younger networks? Malls are pretty young. A lot of young people in the malls. Amusement parks, pretty young. Airports, older. So, and what's nice is a report in, I'm not really here shilling for the Nielsen report, but I am saying what's available in here is you have comparisons of one network to another. That's what makes this report valuable, that opportunity to compare. And we've run out of slides. But I don't know that we've run out of questions. We have another few minutes. So are there any other questions? Be happy to take them.
Here's one. If I've understood correctly, in digital place-based electronic measurement, the individual spots are not measured as in case of TV with people meters, but an average measure of total content is performed, which includes spots.
I think that's a fair statement. I think care is taken so that it's representative of individual spots. You might say the same thing actually about TV, where you have the C and C3 rating is commercial, but it's not necessarily your commercial. So in both cases, it's as good a judgment as we can make. And the sausage tastes good.
Yeah, well, I think one thing that's worthwhile pointing out is that with television, there's always the traditional thing of you're heading out to the bathroom, you're switching channels during commercials. You've got DVR where you can zip through the commercials on the playback. And fundamentally, it is unlikely that you are going to leave the zone of proximity when a commercial comes on. You're in its own way a captive audience. And, you know, as it said, and I don't need to shill for the industry either, but effectively it's live all the time. There's no DVR to playback. So that the issues are different with television versus what you would find in place-based for commercial versus program content.
But that is a well-stated perceptive question. They all were well-stated perceptive questions. Any more? Now it's time for foolish questions. Anyone want to put one in?
No, I think that does it.
I think the last Nielsen, do you have some words?
No? Shall we close? Well, I'd like to thank everybody who participated, and to Nielsen for putting this together, and to Richard, who always does such a fabulous job. Again, for anyone interested in the recording of this webinar, we will follow up with a link to all attendees where you can download today's presentation. And for all the agency people on the phone, if you're interested in learning more about this sector, the DPAA has an industry overview presentation that we'd be happy to come and present to your groups. You just need to tell us. And I'm sure Nielsen online, on location, would do the same, so you can reach out to either Teresa or Paul to arrange a seminar along the lines that you heard today. So also, please feel free to explore our website at www.dp-aa.org. It's chock full of information that should help you in evaluating this medium. Again, thanks for joining us today. Thank you very much. Bye-bye. Wow.